Welcome to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership, the podcast that cuts through the noise to deliver real-world leadership wisdom from the front lines of business. I'm your host, Billy Duren, CEO, curious learner, and passionate student of people and performance. Whether you're leading a team of 10 or 10,000, this show is your go-to resource for creative insights that drive results and build people. Whether you're already in the CEO chair or you're just beginning your journey, this is a theory, it's the nuts and bolts. Let's go to work. All right, everyone, welcome into the meeting room. Today, we're going to be talking about leadership because this is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. I'm the host, Billy Duren, and today I'm very excited to welcome into the meeting room Don Monistere. Don Monistere is the CEO and President of General Informatics, and today we're going to be talking about AI. Don, I don't know that there's a single conference that I go to today where there aren't breakout sessions for AI. So thank you for taking a minute to join us on the podcast today.
Thank you, Billy. Excited to be here, man.
Well, Don is a entrepreneur, author, speaker, accomplished executive. I know that Don has written several books. I love the titles of your books, Don: Enhanced Life Performance, Enhanced Executive Performance, and Enhanced Corporate Performance. Your bio is so impressive. What a great career you've had. I know that you've worked with our team for years, and I know that you just spent some time with us and really opened our eyes to the world of AI and how it is moving forward and moving into our offices, into our distribution models, all the things that we're doing on a daily basis. We're seeing it nudging itself in. So now I guess we're swinging the door open and going to invite it in. So, Don, to just kick us off, tell us a little bit about kind of what your experiences have been, in the last, 4, 5, 6, 12, I don't even want to say 12 months anymore with AI. It's like 12 minutes. What's the last 12
That's
minutes
right.
been like? So just kind of get us up to speed so we can find a launching point today.
First of all, very much appreciate being here. Yeah, I don't go anywhere, Billy, without having to talk about this particular topic. And interestingly enough, having, 37 years in IT, this is by far the one technology that is progressing faster than any other technology that I've come across in the past. Now, one of the things that I love about my industry is that it's always changing. This one's a little bit more difficult, especially if you're looking to invest in platforms. That's the one thing that I can say when you look at the last, let's call it 4 to 8 months, I think there's a big disparity between what is happening with the various language models. They're moving at light speed, but I would say corporate America is still trying to decide, hey, where do I get into that spinning merry-go-round of craziness, right? And so I would argue there's a little bit of apprehension in many cases today specifically with corporate America, but man, the models are improving at light speed. And it's almost baffling to me in many cases how much money's being spent on AI, so much so that, many of these companies, the leaders, if you will, XAI and OpenAI, man, it's going to be a while before any of them make money. And so it'll be interesting to see how they continue to monetize. I think we're starting to see glimpses of what that monetization looks like. But the thing that is really, really, first and foremost for me, as we service our own customers, is how do we get this integrated into their business? How do we get this integrated into their technology suite? And for that matter, how do we get it integrated in their operation? Because this is one of those things that I've said before, and if you've been in my industry, you'll get what I'm saying. Like, we haven't talked about information or data in a very long time. We've talked about technology. We've talked about compute. We've talked about the line of business application that we run. We've never really thought about all of the data that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. And this one tool or this one concept, really, if you think about it, is really bringing that back to the forefront.
So, Don, when you think about what General Informatics brings to the table, just so, because we'll give you a chance at the end to tell people how they can get in touch with you, but, your phone doesn't ring anymore. I guess it just kind of get an email or a text message or whatever. When people are reaching out to General Informatics, what are you hearing the most? What sort of questions are you getting around AI? I've got a bunch of leadership questions that we're going to tie these together in a little bit, but just tell people a little bit about what sort of calls you're fielding these days.
Yeah, the single most heard request I get is, hey, Don, we know we need to be embracing AI. We have no idea where to start. And so that typically will turn into a conversation about, where their data resides, what AI means to them, what line of business applications that they're using, and how quickly is that manufacturer embracing artificial intelligence in that platform. And for that matter, really getting to understand and know their overall operation. Because, if there's one of the things that I've always said, that if you're a consultant, the one place that you can look like a champion is go find the place where knowledge transfers from application to application or from person to person, because chances are somebody's dropping the ball somewhere. And AI can solve a lot of that. And what we used to call back in the day, 15 years ago, DevOps, and that was like a key word that everybody used. I would argue that artificial intelligence truly is going to engage into the depth of the operation and create an opportunity to gain more knowledge, more insight, and for that matter, reasoning and discernment at some point for a broader base worker, so to speak. And so there are a lot of subject matter experts that might be a little bit nervous, but right now, for my customer base and what people are asking me is, hey, where do I get started and how do I do this?
So, Don, we're going to go in and unpack some of the tools and how the applications are here a little bit later. But this is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. And I want to ask some questions around leadership, because when you talk about these emerging AI platforms and sort of challenging traditional models, what's going to separate? I mean, you're in leadership development. I mean, I've heard your stuff. And you're very dynamic in explaining and talking about leadership as much as you are anything. What's going to separate great leader from mediocre in this environment?
It's amazing how we're already seeing this tweak a little bit. I like to say those leaders who are very entrepreneurial will adjust to this new AI world, if you will, a lot better than those who are, fairly rigid in their approach to leadership. I'm reminded of sales training where they would train you on, if a customer says they don't like this, then this is your pat answer. Like, that is not what is, in front of us today. What lies in the future for us is that entrepreneurial minded leader who's willing to be iterative in their approach. Like, let's take a look at where we are today and how can we just iterate so that we can get to that next step. I don't need to know the 5-year outcome. I want to get an idea of where we're headed, right? But I don't have to have it in black and white and say, I have to know that answer before I can move forward, because you'll never move. And so I think leaders have to recognize when to be steadfast and make a decision and run with it, and when not to be stubborn, right? So there's a big difference between the two. And I think being steadfast with AI is important, but not embracing the iterative approach of this is likely a mistake, because there's so much to gain even early on, even if you don't have the exact plan laid out.
Well, when you were with us, I've probably shared this phrase. Don, I'm a self-proclaimed stealer of ideas. So you introduced this idea to us, and I've probably shared it a half a dozen times already. This idea of crawl, run, walk, and then fly, and how companies can ease their way into. There are other philosophies out there that says pick a subject or pick a project and run. How would you encourage leaders as they're hearing these ideas? I don't know if I buy the Adidas version or the New Balance version or the Nike version. How do you counsel to these leaders now that are going, I got all these options. What do I do first?
Yes. So the first thing I would say is be ready to approach artificial intelligence in a very hybrid way. And that means potentially using multiple models, but for that matter, multiple tool sets. I mean, I can name off 4 or 5 different tool sets that we use day to day that have AI components in them, or specifically are built around a very specific AI model. But you're right, the crawl, walk, run concept really works with artificial intelligence, because you can extract value very quickly, which is not necessarily, if you think about many of the big projects that I'm involved in, they're 2-year projects, and you don't start seeing any value out of that project until it's over, which is always, for me as a leader, that's nerve-wracking, right? You invest a couple of $1 million here or there, and it starts turning into real money, right? And so the nice thing about where we are in artificial intelligence is you can start utilizing some of these models, some of these tools very quickly, and you'll start to see very quick efficiency gains. One of the things that I'll use as an example, so we have a platform that we sell as a service at General Informatics, and we allow that platform to access multiple models. And you'll find that one model may do a better job of answering a question or running a specific automation better than another. And so having the ability to compare the two is really important. And so if you decided, look, I'm all in on this one model, and you find out that, man, you could pivot and do a better job over here, having that capacity to do that's pretty important. But like I said, the best way to get started is to start. And there's some pretty low-hanging fruit that most companies can dive into that will give their teams and their leaders some practice getting these models up and running, because regardless of what models we use or what tools we use, the starting point is the data. And so your corporate data is 100% the most valuable asset that you own. And so, you've got to be very careful and be a good steward of that data. So you got to know where it's going, know that it's secure, know that it's stable, and know that it's accessible. And, it's funny, like from a cybersecurity thing, which is my second passion, right? All of those things contradict one another. Like if it's super valuable and I make it accessible, I put myself at risk, right? And so you have to be mindful of the fact that when you're embracing AI, you're truly doing the two things that concern cybersecurity guys the most, right? Making it available, making sure that it's accessible to folks. So I would definitely say that leaders are going to start to find out that life without AI is not going to happen. And so you have to embrace it. And, this is a common statement that we hear on a regular basis. Like AI is not going to replace all the jobs, but the people who embrace AI will be the ones that get hired before the ones that don't, for sure.
Well, Don, it sounded like when you are looking at a project with a company that your company offers a suite of models. In other words, you've got a model that works better with this problem or this project. So that makes me think, as we have started talking to you about this, that the engagement with someone who is familiar with the execution and performance of the different models might be someone that that companies that our listeners want to partner with, because they already are familiar with outcomes already. You talked about low-hanging fruit, and some of the language models that we're using now, are the simple things, the job description writing, simple memo writing, all those things like that may be one of the first things that they kind of wade out into the water, so to speak, in these things. But tell me a little bit more about the suite of models. So not to just be married to one model, but you sounded like you have a suite of models that you could offer depending on what the challenge might be. Did I hear that right?
You did. And imagine, if you will, you log into a particular platform, our GI platform, and there's a very specific thing that you want to do, and you recognize, hey, this is more analytical, so I'm going to choose the OpenAI model as opposed to something that might be a little bit more emotional, and Mistral's model does a better job of that. So having the opportunity to do that, and Billy, it's funny, we talk about being entrepreneurial and being able to be flexible in this process. When I first started all of this, when you created a very specific instance, if you will, for a language model to do something, that was back in the day called a GPT, or, a general purpose exercise, if you will. Now they're calling those automations, or they're calling them agents. So even the language is changing, and we're doing exactly the same thing. So we call them automations now, but let's say, for instance, there's a very specific automation that we're working on, and there's a number that we've worked with clients on. But one of the good examples, and pretty easy for most people to understand, if you've ever had to answer an RFP, that's usually something that takes multiple people to do, and it takes quite a bit of time. in order to accomplish, especially if these RFPs are complex RFPs. And so for a number of our clients, we've created an RFP automation where we've trained that specific model and given it that, that version one, if you will, of the RFP, saving, I had one customer who told me, he's like, dude, you saved me 2 days. This took 11 minutes. This would have taken us 2 days had we done this manually. And we were able to build it in the platform and then try different models to see what, response we got and how detailed one would be over the other. And it really does help when you have that flexibility.
Well, Don, you mentioned another thing about data security, and we live in this world, and particularly when we're talking about the values of the company, building trust and transparency and shared ownership in our model of employee ownership. How do you balance the data security and the announcement of we're going out here for this open artificial intelligence? How do we go to the company and say, trust us, be confident that this is closed loop? How does that work? How are you introducing that portion of it to your clients?
Yeah, I think this is a lesson in data security and something that we should do consistently, regardless of what tool sets we're using. But the governance that we place and the controls that we put in place over our data security is super important. And I think it's way more important now to be transparent. Something that we've dealt with on a regular basis is something we call shadow IT, which is, there's what IT is doing day to day, and then there's what our users are doing that we don't know about, right? And so I can't tell you how oftentimes we find out that we're supporting 20 applications that a customer may be using, but we find out that there are users in the environment that have downloaded their own application and they're using it, and no one in the organization knows that. Today's the day that we need to go find that out, right? Because not all of these artificial intelligence models, and for that matter, tool sets, are created equal. Because of the speed in which these things are happening, people are going to market in a very iterative fashion. And so I don't know if you've heard the word vibe coding. Like, there's a lot of people who are doing coding, building applications, who really do not have a coding background, definitely not a security background. And so they're putting out applications that may have not been well vetted. And so now more than ever, it's important for us to be transparent, not only with our executive leadership, but it has to go up and down. We have to embrace, hey, tell me the tools that you're using that are effective, with no concern about there being any, retribution, right? We're not going to get mad at you. Just tell us what you're using so that we can take the time to either build controls around them or at least go find out, hey, was this particular application fully vetted? And I'll use an example. One of the really popular transcription services is an application called Fireflies. Fantastic application. One of the first ones that we saw proliferate in our own organization very quickly, right? Well, it's a cloud-based application, right? And so when you are uploading a transcript to something that is listening in on your meetings, well, I've got healthcare customers, I've got municipality customers. There are a lot of times that I am having conversations that I've signed an NDA for that are protected under some statutory or regulatory requirement. And in the event that that cloud application did not have two-factor authentication on it, I may be breaking contracts that I have consistently with all of my clients. And so if somebody was doing that and I didn't know it, right, that not having knowledge of it is not an excuse, and it's not admissible in court. So, like, providing the governance and explaining very transparently to your teammates, hey, look, guys, we could really put ourselves at risk if we do this wrong. So we want to embrace the right applications. We want to make sure that we secure them in the right fashion. And when we are uploading information, when we are sharing corporate data, or for that matter, because our corporate data oftentimes is our customers' data, that it is 100% secure. And we've created the same controls around that as we would prior to AI ever being the case. So it's definitely something that we have to remain transparent and make sure that we're communicating both up and down our organization. and really embracing them and saying, look, we're not trying to, this is not a gotcha moment, right? This is more about how are you using the tool sets that you're using? And look, we know you're using OpenAI. Tell me how you're using it, right? You're using ChatGPT. What are you doing? Well, I'm just asking it questions. Okay, no problem. Are you ever uploading corporate documentation? Like if you are, we need to know that, because while OpenAI is not really worried about that, they will use that information to help train their model. And we need to make sure that we have a good chain of custody of that data. Where does it go? If we ever say we don't know where it goes, you got to call time out, right?
Well, I would say this. Part of our marching orders here is to gather these nuggets of wisdom. And I can already tell, our first to check the box item here is going out into our employees and saying, hey, what are you using, to making sure the loop is being closed. I can just imagine a leader listening to this thinking about particularly those that are using, whether it's ChatGPT or the other things, there may be a lot of harmless work being done. And I think you mentioned that, but there also could be the potential for, and it's really the potential for, to make sure that we're closing that loop. So Don, when we're talking about efficiency gains, I'm going to touch on leadership one more time before we get into the application stuff. When we talk about the efficiency gains, how do we blend that with this cultural responsibility of maintaining employee engagement? Because, we want smart people doing smart things, but we also want to use smart tools to do smart things. So how do we marry those two things in keeping intact the culture of the organization, saying people first is really the greatest asset we have is our people, and we don't want to undervalue them, but at the same time, we want to say, okay, we want to pair great people with great tools. And how are you doing that?
Yeah. So look, if there's one thing that I believe is worthy of investment in training, it's utilization of artificial intelligence tools within your day-to-day work. And I think now more than ever, that is incredibly important, because otherwise we're really not preparing our workforce for the future, because every one of our workers are going to be enhanced with artificial intelligence at some point in their life over the next 10 years, right? And it will happen sooner rather than later. But by far, investment in training and making sure that we understand how they accomplish what they accomplish is incredibly important. To ignore that is really putting ourselves at risk. And more than ever, it's creating kind of we do a lot of career pathing, right? We want to make sure that we understand where they've entered into our organization and what their career path looks like. I would argue you almost have to do the same thing with AI, in that you take that job description and then you list out what tools have been used specifically that have been very effective and created efficiencies for that particular job description. That way you're defining at least, and then you can hire to it if need be, right? Or if you recognize that maybe that individual is deficient in that specific approach to doing their job, you can train on it very quickly. Because, and I'll use a very easy example. If I'm a content writer, if I'm a blogger, and I interview today and somebody says, hey, are you using AI? And you say no, chances are you're not getting that job, because you can hammer out a lot more content using AI than if you did not. Now, you have to understand and know the way to do that in a very, efficient and manner that's going to meet all of the copyright concerns that everybody has when they talk about artificial intelligence, right? You have to be, ethical use is a conversation that we talk about all the time when it comes to content. But at the end of the day, if you're not using artificial intelligence and you're a content writer of any sort, you're probably falling behind. And I would say the same holds true for the legal industry. I can't tell you how many attorneys are calling us going, man, now we're starting to worry about the risk, because if we don't use it, we're going to fall behind of our competition. So how do we find that ethical boundary between utilizing it with our paralegals and making sure that they are embracing it without basically pushing them down a path of doing the wrong thing? And so much of that is about training and investing in our workforce, and even more so now today than ever before, right? I mean, if we had a teammate and his job was to turn a screwdriver, and he came on board and couldn't turn a screwdriver. Well, we either need to not hire him or train him, right? And it's the same thing with AI.
So, Don, I just had an interview with a communications content writer, and she said the good thing about AI is writer's block is no longer a thing. I can at least get an idea started just by asking the right question in one of the learning models. So, Don, before we take a break, I want to cover this one thing. So, just addressing the fear factor. So, you got leaders listening. You got leaders that have been doing their job for years. And, that they hear all this is coming. We want to make sure that we're clearly communicating that we're not trying to create an atmosphere that we're trying to push people out. How do you address the fear factor? I mean, you're going into a lot of companies, and I'm sure you've seen this. How are you addressing the fear factor when it comes to embracing start with the AI platforms?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I always go to the concept of scale, right? I don't think that in the next 2 years, you're going to wake up one day and say, wow, I need 20% less staff than I ever needed. And so I can go and execute a RIF. I think what we're going to find is that our productivity is going to 2, 3, 4, 5 times fold, get better and better, which allows us to scale the business, allows us to grow the business without necessarily having to add labor at the same rate that we would have in the past. And considering the unemployment rate right now, that's probably not a bad thing, because it is very difficult to find people with the skill sets that are needed today, I'm sure, in just about every industry, right? Now, what I will tell the individual user or the quote unquote employee, be fearful if you're not embracing AI. Be fearful if you're not utilizing these tool sets or don't understand, because then you're basically opting out of a tool set that can make you incredibly efficient and incredibly attractive to an employer. So, I don't see this as we're going to lay off 20% of the business. Now, sometimes investors like to think that, or like to put pressure on leaders to go find that within the organization. And I would tell you that's a lot harder to find today than what most people might think out the gate. It's not a human replacement. It's a human enhancer. And I've always suggested to leaders, find ways to enhance your teammate, and you're going to find more productivity, you're going to find more revenue, and you're going to find more growth. And that's what we're after, right?
Well, I'll tell you this, it's exciting. A little fearful in that I know there are people listening, and I mean, I'm on the short runway end of my career, and there are a lot of people listening that might not be as willing to embrace, but I think you made a good point. Let's not dig our heels in here and say, I have no interest in this. I think that would be reckless to have that approach. It is that let us explore, and I'm going to go back to what you told our company several weeks ago. It's the crawl, run, walk, and then soar version, and that's the way we're going to walk towards it. So, Don, we're going to take a really quick break. This is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership. We are with Don Monistere. We'll be right back.
Threaded Fasteners is a 100% employee-owned company with a mission to create value in and for the people we serve. If you're interested in learning more about our people-centric culture or need a customized fastener solution, send us an email at culture@threadedfasteners.com. That's culture@threadedfasteners.com.
All right, everyone, we're back with Don Monistere. And Don, this is the one I couldn't wait to get to. When we were together, we talked about the model that you are building, and I'm looking so forward to hearing more about this and even sort of creating my own, because this actually excites me and scares me all at the same time about the agent, your individual AI agent that you're building. Tell us a little bit about how that started in your mind and how that's going.
Yeah, I've got a duplicate Don Monistere, right? And who's faster, better, definitely one of my helpers for sure. Look, when we embraced, this concept of building a platform, building the various agents that we have at GI, obviously what I was going to do was I was going to be the guinea pig first, right? Let me find out how we can tweak these models and really make them seem real and actually have discernment and kind of follow the same thing that you might expect out of just a human intelligent, right? I've been fortunate in that I just love to write content. And I will say that all three of my books were published prior to ChatGPT ever showing up. So you can rest assured it is all my content, and it was painful. But I've blogged, I've written numerous articles, in LinkedIn, and I have an agent that has every single piece of content I've ever written. And one of the things that you do when you train a model, or I should say train an agent, because that's not necessarily model training. You're just creating a database of information that replicates the information that you're providing it. And it's obviously learning all of that information. But part of the thing that you can control is controlling the persona of that particular agent. And because I was, testing the heck out of it, I was going to get as detailed as I could on my own psyche, how I approach writing content, how I am typically very verbose in my communication style. I think in the persona, I even put, I'm very challenged from a punctuation perspective, because I can write a run-on sentence better than anybody, man. And so as I was training this model and continuing to give it content, I got to a place where I could prompt it and say, you're going to write an article on this particular topic. You know everything that I've ever said about that topic. You know my writing style. You know my communication style. You've got MP4s where you've heard me on podcasts. You've got it all. Write me the version 1 of this article and let's see what it looks like. And man, Billy, the first time I read it, I'm like, dude, that's me. That is me down to the bad punctuation. Like it was a surreal moment. And so for me, and again, I'll go back to ethics. I will never copy and paste that and post that somewhere, right? That is definitely what I consider to be my starting point. But to your point, there's no writer's block anymore, right? You don't have to sit and toil away at what topic do I need to be writing about. And at one point, I was trying to decide, okay, what's the next book that I want to publish? And I said when I published my third one, I'd never do it again. I will admit I'm starting to get the itch again. And I asked my agent, I'm like, hey, what's the next book? What should I be focused on? And it gave me a really, really good answer. I'm not going to share that though.
No, I'm with you. I'm fascinated by it, particularly if you can build the information and it can generate the article or the memo, and then you can tweak it, how much time is saved by that? Because I know that there's a lot of time and effort that goes into getting it just right, getting it in your own style.
Yeah.
So I can see where the value in that is. I shared this when you told that story. I'd shared this with my wife recently, and I just want her to know there's a cooler version of Billy Duren out there in the future somewhere. So the technology and the artificial intelligence, all the things that are moving forward at warp speed, and I love to hear all the fascinating things that are going on with it. So when you look at what does 3 to 5 years look like from now? So we're in it right now at warp speed. I mean, can you even project? You talked about you and a friend of yours had just recently gone over some information from 3 years ago, looking back. Now look forward 3 years. We've advanced so much in the past 3 years. What does 3 to 5 years look like going forward?
Yeah, man, that is such a hard question to answer. What I will say is that, when you think about Moore's Law, like we've blown all that out of the water. The speed in which we are running and these models are improving is just pretty incredible. And when you think about where we were 2.5 years ago, with ChatGPT 3.0. It was almost like a kind of a really intelligent puppy dog, right? like it would do what you needed every once in a while. And then 4 came out, and now we're talking about 5.0. And what you recognize is like overnight, not only did it get much more intelligent, start to look at like even more deep research, and it looks more like discernment. It looks more like reasoning, but it's also multimodal, everything from voice and images and, all of the different mediums that we can use with artificial intelligence is just outstanding and a little bit astounding. So when I think about, okay, well, that's the baseline, what's next, I think it's more about the interface, right? And by interface, I don't just mean like a piece of equipment that's plugged into our brain or something like that. I think it is how do we experience it, I think is going to move much, much faster. I believe they're already testing large language models at drive-through windows for various food chains. And, like if you think about it, I love to sit at my computer and use AI. Most people are using AI on their phone, right? And most of the workforce that's coming out of college and into the workforce today, they don't sit at a computer. They do everything on their phone. And so where that goes next, I think will be very interesting, because I think the interface, I think AI is going to bring about a change in the interface. I don't know what that is. I don't claim to know, but I can see that is definitely going to be kind of the next thing that we see. Like if you look at what VR is doing, and there are VR glasses where I can sit down and have three 32-inch screens with just glasses on, right? And that's just amazing that kind of technology is out there. But I think what we'll see, Billy, is obviously the ability to really upscale our abilities to reason and to make complex decisions. I think research in and of itself is going to change the way that we do research, because the deep research models are already not only doing the research, but they're doing the research in multiple columns, comparing their research and then coming to conclusions based on that research. So I think we will see that continue to get better and better. And I'm not that doomsday guy that says that there's going to be, this moment of singularity where, the AI is so much more intelligent than we are that it doesn't have much to do with us anymore. I think that's not necessarily something that I attest to, at least today, right? I think that we will continue to enhance these models. We will continue to get better and better and kind of reduce the number of errors that exist. But man, 3 years from now, I can't wait to see where we are.
Well, I want to ask you some specific questions about how these applications may be able to enhance the manufacturing models and the distribution models that companies, a lot of companies that we deal with are involved in, and our listeners, because we have our team that is listening and they're wanting to know, okay, well, I hear all this cool stuff over here. This sounds like, science fiction. But, how do we bring this into, manufacturing distribution? And I want to ask you about that in a second. But before that, I want to say this. How are you vetting, so you say you offer this suite of applications. How are you vetting that? I mean, I'm thinking about how much trouble it must be for you to spend time in the now and the next, because in 5 minutes, everything's changed. So how do you balance your time in what's in front of you compared to what's right out the next cutting edge thing that you're having to vet? How do you balance your time in that?
Yeah, no, it's difficult. And I find myself, vacillating back and forth between platforms and our own strategy. Like, what platform should we use? Should I create my own, dedicated environment within our private cloud and use an open source model? There's so many approaches to it. And our approach and our strategy, our product team meets weekly because it changes so often, right? And so our approach has been, look, let's have access to all of it that we can verify is secure, right? So like our standard of measure is, can I secure it? And I'll use a good example. I had a fantastic platform that we wanted to use, and I knew the owners who were building it. They were fantastic programmers, and they were not focused on the security piece of it nearly as much as I felt like they should. I mean, it could do a lot of things for not a lot of money, right? And I just decided, look, man, we can't go down that path. I can't trust that you guys are going to embrace the security portion of this as much as you need to. So that's our baseline. Can we secure it to the level in which we can secure any other cloud-based application, with multi-factor authentication and all the different things, that encryption, the things that you want to have in order to run those applications? And then it becomes, all right, what use cases do these various, agents and platforms allow us to do? And so when I think about your environment and when I think about, your industry specifically, there are things that we do today that we believe requires tons of subject matter expertise and institutional knowledge that doesn't exist outside of an individual. Well, man, institutional knowledge is just knowledge. And like starting to document that institutional knowledge is step one, right? If we can get that in context and get that into an agent, then we can start asking questions of that agent that you would have to go find, Billy or Don, whereas you don't necessarily need Billy or Don anymore, right? Necessarily to answer that specific question. The other thing is that what we don't recognize is that most of our data that helps us make decisions is in various places. It's in disparate tool sets. It's in your line of business application. It's in a spreadsheet. It's in a Word document. It's in email. Well, what I think you're going to find in 3 to 5 years when we talk about, what's next is think about all of that feeding into one data set and AI interface over the top of that, looking at all of it at the same time. Now, if you think about what that's going to look and feel like, that's going to look like discernment. That's going to look like reasoning. That's going to look like, dare I say, thinking, right? And it's funny, when ChatGPT first came out and you asked it a question, it would say it's thinking. It wasn't thinking. It never has been thinking, right? But when you're accessing all of the data and you've put that large language model on top of that, and you've created this opportunity to consider all of it in context, then all of a sudden it does look like thinking all along. And you'll start to see that what used to concern us, i.e. like logistics or, inventory control or the various decisions that we have to make by comparing a ton of historical data, we'll be able to go to a prompt and just ask the question and say, hey, what inventory do I need to be prepared for in July? And it will tell you. And we're starting to see that in the various agents that we're programming now. Those are getting better and better. And so iteratively, companies are telling me, do you know how long that used to take me and how many pieces of data I had to go grab in order to do that? And while it's not fully integrated and maybe it's a little messy, right? You still got to go into your line of business application and procure the order. The next step is then go take that interface, connect it to the APIs that exist for that particular line of business application. And then it becomes, tell me what I need for July. Here it is. Check, check, check. Hey, go order it. And it just goes and orders it. That's where we're headed, right? And it's funny. One of the things, and I'll share this with you when, because people are fearful of this. One of the things that artificial intelligence can do better than anything else is code. And it can write code better than any coder typically coming out of a 4-year degree program. I've probably needed more coders than ever, which is interesting, right? Because of artificial intelligence, which codes incredibly well, I needed to go hire 2 more coders so that we can start integrating all of that into our customers' line of business applications and applications that they use daily. But they're all using AI to code.
Yeah, and it kind of, as we wrap this up, and this has been fascinating. I mean, I'm a little bit. I told our group today before the podcast, I said, I'm not sure that I can ask all Don the right questions, but I think if I ask him one question, he'll take it from there. And I appreciate how you've expanded on even going into the models of what looks like a distribution request and saying that how many have I used? How many do I need in inventory? What's the lead time? When do I need to place this order? All these things that we are actually having to go in and formulate some sort of spreadsheet type of execution to get the data. Now it'll just be saying, here's what I want. Please deliver me the information. I know that's an oversimplification of it, but Don, kind of the last question, when you look ahead to the companies that you're dealing with and prospective companies, what do you see really is going to be the business advantage? How are companies going to take advantage of this to help them become, a better organization, not just more profitable, but how to more effectively engage with their people, more effectively bring value to their clients, more effectively bring, value to their time management? What are the real business advantages when we look back and, 5 years from now, 3 to 5 years from now, say, here's what AI has helped us do as an organization?
Yeah, Billy, it's a great question. And I'm a very optimistic guy when it comes to the various uses of technology, right? In general. I can point to all of the efficiency gains that we've experienced with our clients who have embraced the various platforms that we sell. And so efficiency obviously is one of those things. Productivity is obviously one of those things. But the thing that I like to think about is, I always say that what I'm striving for day in and day out is fulfillment. Like I don't want to just work without fulfillment. I want to put in, and of course we put in 16 hours sometimes a day. And so when you're doing that, you better be able to sit down at the end of the day and say, I did good work today. It was fulfilling good work. And I made someone else's life better because of the work that I did. And I think with artificial intelligence, with the various technologies that will be adjacent to AI, we're going to get that opportunity to do that more often than not and really focus on the things that we love. I don't think of this as I said, as a worker replacement. It's truly a worker enhancer. And I think those mundane things that we do day in and day out, and I'll give you an example, which was really kind of a watershed moment for me. Those mundane things that we do day in and day out, we just won't have to address anymore. I don't love going to the grocery store. Like, that's just not my favorite thing in the world. There's going to be a day that if you don't ever want to go to the grocery store, man, you don't have to go. And that happens today, but the interface is not necessarily spectacular. One day you're going to walk in and your refrigerator is going to have already scanned what you have in it, and it's already going to make the order, and you're not going to have to think about it, man. I'll share this with you, Billy. And this was, like I said, a watershed moment for me. I have a platform that I use. If you call my number, you're going to get Megan, and Megan's going to answer the phone, and she has complete access to my calendar, and she is 100% artificial intelligence. She's been trained to talk to you and have a conversation with you. And she knows my personality. So she knows that most of the people that call me directly are pretty funny cats anyway. So she's got a great personality. I was helping another guy set it up after he heard mine. He's like, dude, I want that too. And at one point, we didn't recognize it because not only can it receive calls, it can make calls. And at one point, he and I got on a call that we had scheduled, and he said, hey, Don, I asked him, I said, hey, man, how did my AI do on the schedule? And he's like, oh, wait, dude, I didn't call your AI. My AI called your AI. And I was like, wait a minute. So we scheduled an appointment of which we both showed up for, and no human ever talked to each other to schedule it. Like, that's a watershed moment. And I think insight into what we are going to see in the future, where a lot of that mundane stuff is going to not boil up to the top until it's time for discernment and human interaction.
Well, two things. Okay, so here's my takeaway from that crazy story. You've got two AIs that are dating and you don't even know about it. And,
right.
and secondly, the refrigerator will never override my Bluebell ice cream order. If my wife don't want me to have it,
there you go.
She can create some sort of block where my refrigerator can't order my Bluebell ice cream. Don,
there you go.
Don, it's been an absolute pleasure. I just want to thank you so much for taking time to join us on the podcast. Tell people how they can get in touch with you.
Yes. So obviously you can reach out to me directly on my email address. It's donald@geninf.com. You can go to our website, same thing, geninf.com. You want to call our main number, it's 888-349-8766. And we'd love to be involved in anything you got going on. We obviously are a complete technology outsource outfit. Anything from a technology perspective we can handle. But if you're focused in on some AI and you want to know more about it, man, I would love to have a conversation with you.
Well, Don, I appreciate you taking the time. It's been cool. And as fast as things are changing, we'll probably have to have you on in the next 6 to 8 months to tell us about the next best thing. So until then, we'll see you in the office sometime soon.
Yeah, I look forward to it, Billy. Thank you, man.
Thanks, Don. All right, I'll be right back with some closing thoughts. What a great interview with Don Monistere. I appreciate him coming on. Just some of the nuggets for me. I can't get away from crawl, walk, run, and fly. I know that a lot of people are looking at a lot of different platforms, a lot of different models. But I love the engagement we have with Don Monistere because he knows what he's doing and he's bringing us the tools that we need. And we're not chasing rabbits. We're bringing good content into the organization. Some of the pickups from him, no substitute for creating an environment for our employees to be successful leaders. I mean, that's our responsibility. Create the environment. We don't have to have all the answers. We're looking to create an environment where those answers can come forward. And then that AI is not a worker replacement, but a worker enhancement. Appreciate Don so much. And we're looking forward to the next episode already. But until then, tighten up.
Thank you for tuning in to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, brought to you by the proud employee owners of Threaded Fasteners. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe to, rate, and review the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a leadership story to tell or a question to ask? We'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@threadedfasteners.com. That's podcast@threadedfasteners.com. This show is made possible by our family at Threaded Fasteners, Inc., where our mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. Interested in learning more about TFI and how we create value in our team, in our community, and in our customers? Visit us at threadedfasteners.com. Thanks again for listening. This show is edited and produced by Johnny Glenn and our friends at Deep Fried Studios.